It's noon. All right, thank you everybody for joining. I see we've got people streaming in, so I'll give a little introduction while people are joining. We just came off of a coffee chat led by Jimena and Eric and Felipe. That was really exciting. There was some conversation about pie, so I know what I'm going to do after lunch. I want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Scalette, and I'm going to be moderating this discussion today. I am a first-year student in the Arts Management program at American University. I am also on the EALS committee, the Emerging Arts Leaders Symposium. You'll probably hear EALS all throughout the weekend. I use the pronouns she, her. I am a white woman with wavy-ish brown hair. I'm wearing black today, and you're finding me here in my home office. If we were in person, we'd be at American University in Washington, D.C. And I'd like to acknowledge that American University is located on ancestral lands of the Piscataway and Nashkatonka people. Today we're virtual, obviously, and we're going to be using the webinar format. So when you log in, your cameras and microphones are automatically turned off. The format of this is going to be that we'll begin with some questions I've prepared, just in conversation with the panel, but we are really hoping to hear from you too. So if while we're in discussion, anything like strikes an idea or you want us to elaborate on further, please add your questions to the question and answer button on the bottom of your screen. You should also see the option for closed captioning if that's something you'd like to have. Okay, so if you're here to talk about public art, you are in the right place. I have been thinking a lot about public art just in terms of its accessibility during the pandemic. It is art outside, usually, generally, and it is accessible to people who maybe don't have access to museums or don't want to enter into a museum during a pandemic, or a theater or a studio. Beyond being accessible, it is also very rooted in community and community building practices. I think the public art field has a lot of key principles that a lot of arts managers in all arts fields can relate to. It brings up ideas that a lot of arts managers have been thinking about over the past year, way beyond the past year. And so I'm thrilled to have our esteemed panel here with us today to help us explore some of these issues. We have Meredith Walters from the Brooklyn Public Library System, Cherrah Barclay from Arts on the Block, and Ryan Patterson and Moline Jackson, who both are differently affiliated with the Maryland State Arts Council. I would urge you all to read their bios on Sched. You can find their full descriptions in this panel on your schedule and also under the speakers section of the schedule. So to get us started, I've asked each panelist to just introduce themselves quickly and share their favorite public art piece. So we'll go in the order of Ryan and then Moline, Meredith, and Cherrah. Ryan, would you mind getting us started?
Sure, thanks for having me. I am a Caucasian male in my 30s wearing a gray hat and a black sweatshirt in front of some family photos and books. The piece that I submitted is the, is it being shared? I don't see it.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. I'm going to be toggling back and forth between screen sharing, so your guys' screens might change a little bit.
So it's hard to pick one piece we love. I'm sure that's true for everybody, but I picked this awesome Tom Miller mural in Cherry Hill, the Cherry Hill neighborhood in Baltimore, and a colleague had led the restoration effort around this piece a few years ago when I worked with the Baltimore Office of Promotion in the Arts. And I just love the diversity of ways it depicts people from Baltimore enjoying the city.
Cool. Moline, what do you think?
And this is Moline Jackson. You feel free to call me Molly. Moline just means little Molly. And I am an African-American Black woman in her late 30s with dark brown hair. And I have my little bangles, my ear bangles on. And I'm fair skinned because I need some sun. But my background is in landscape architecture and real estate development. And I'm affiliated through public art by virtue of being a commissioner, a newly appointed commissioner on the Maryland State Arts Council. And I have been on the Maryland State Arts Council on the board as well. So Ryan and I have worked together. And of course, I love Arts on the Block. I coordinate the public art program for Montgomery County, for the entire county, and have been doing so for about 7 years now. And that's public art in private development. So it's a little bit nuanced because most programs are involving publicly funded projects. I work hand in hand with Arts and Humanities Council, both in Montgomery County and in Prince George's County. Have great relationships with Susan Jenkins, who is in Montgomery County, and Rhonda Dallas, who is in Prince George's County, the county for which I live. I love Prince George's County. I was originally born in Washington, D.C., and raised in Wheaton, which is located in the county for which I work in now. So it's a great honor and a privilege to work in the county for which I was raised. This gives me great purpose in life, not only to talk and to be affiliated with public art being that it is accessible to the public 24 hours a day. And it is a grassroots kind of led concept. So I've always gravitated to community programs and grassroots programs that get people to come together.
Great. Moline, do you want to quickly talk about your work in Silver Spring, the Silver Spring Art Walk?
Sure. So this image is of a series of conversations that we had with the community. It started in the spring of, I think, 2019, well before COVID happened, and we had hoped to continue it into 2020, but of course, we had to put a pause on the program. And I like this series of conversations because, as you can see, we're bringing people to the art, and we're bringing the artists to the people. So we basically have coordinated this effort to kind of be a walking tour where we walk to the art and the artist actually gets to talk about the art. We start each tour at a local restaurant where we partner with them to kind of just have great conversation to get it kicked off, and then we head out the door and start walking. And it's metro accessible. Silver Spring is metro accessible, so the goal and the hope is always to keep it accessible to everyone, and that it's not just one piece of public art, it's a few different pieces of public art. And the first one, which you're seeing, and an image of the second one too in the lower right hand corner, it was all about murals and metro and being able to have public art at metro locations or transit locations. So I love this work.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think next up we've got Meredith, if you could quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Meredith Walters, and I am the Director of Arts and Culture for the Brooklyn Public Library System, which includes Central Library and 60 branches and growing. And my experience with public art is, as a few people have referred to before, kind of bringing art into, bringing events into public spaces, not so much curating an interaction around specific objects. This piece here is from a project that I really admire. This is one event that's part of a larger framework called Open Field at the Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis, where years ago I used to be the Assistant Director of Public and Interpretive Programs. And what this project does that I so admire is it's a lawn, basically. And the educational department there asked itself, if we want to create a community commons, it's inviting people to bring their own ideas into the space and also to take care of the space and each other. So they provided the community with the opportunity to kind of curate their own events, to propose their own events. And they had an actual tool shed where you could go in and would have anything from water, if you needed it, to ideas for programs, and also kind of a book of etiquette called a field guide. So it was, people bringing their own artistic ideas that ranged from this lantern I don't know, lantern lifting to synchronized monloing to a film festival of cat videos, which has suddenly brought in 10,000 people that they didn't expect, and now it's touring.
Wow.
So really just a wide range of ideas.
That's awesome. Cool. Thank you. Last, Cherrah, would you mind sharing a little bit?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name's Cherrah. My pronouns are she and they. I'm calling in from London, England, and I'm an artist and currently working at Arts on the Block in Silver Spring. I'm a studio crew member. The piece that I shared is actually from, I guess it's from my walks in London. I see a lot of these images, and so they bring me a lot of joy. The artist's name, I believe, is Sticks, and the pieces are of stick figures, and I just think they're incredibly awkward and expressive and funny. And so it's really exciting to see it around and see it in all these different ways. I've seen it on large buildings, long buildings, and the legs are extremely long. It's just awkward and funny, and it just brings me a lot of joy. So I'm really excited to talk with you all, and thank you, Sarah and Molline, for getting me connected to everyone. I'm really excited.
Yeah, no, thank you guys all for being here. I loved seeing all of your pieces, Cherrah. That like totally made me laugh and also made me want to travel because it doesn't look like my surroundings right now. So I'm jealous that you're in London. I know we've talked about that before, but I'm just going to reiterate, I am jealous that you're in London. So the first question that I'd like to just kick off with is pretty broad. I've been thinking about public art in the context of resiliency, the pandemic, reckoning around systematic racism, and what public art and art can do for our spirits. So I'm kind of curious, in your opinion, what do you believe is the value of public art? And even more broadly, like, what do you think public art is for? Molline, if you want to get started with that question, hopefully there's something there for you to latch onto.
Well, there's tons. There is a lot for me to latch on here. And I liken to public art like a soulful dinner, like a soulful dinner. And I'm African American, so at my soulful dinner, there needs to be some greens, there needs to be some mac and cheese, and there needs to be sweet potatoes. I can have, if I have those three things, we're good to go, right? So I have the ingredients I need, and then I want to invite my family or my people to the table, my tribe of people, or just other people to come and taste this good food. And so I liken public art to soulful, a tool. So we use food to bring people to the table so that we can have conversations that bring us closer together. And so that's what public art is supposed to do. It's supposed to spark conversation. It's supposed to lift your spirits. It's supposed to be soulful. It's supposed to have feeling, and at its best, it represents something, or it identifies something about the community for those who are maybe traveling and just stopping through. At its best, it kind of expresses something that is true to the core of the community. So in these times, when things are so unsure and we don't have any real answers to things and things are kind of up in the air, the one thing that you can go back to is that soulful meal, right? The one thing that you can rely on is the things that you know to be true to your core. And so when you put public art into the public realm, which means that it's just accessible to everyone and that everyone should be able to benefit from art. And I also want to say that there are very few things that are brand new. So this concept of public art is not brand new. We just use the term public art. So I did want to mention that, but that you can kind of huddle around the good stuff. Susan Jenkins has said that many times, that public art piece becomes the core, that becomes the center, becomes the soul of the community.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone have anything they want to add?
I actually do. I loved what you said, Molly, when you were talking about when you're talking about a tribe, like coming together and enjoying something, but also having something that really reflects like the core of who you are. I really believe that about public art. I really believe that about like successful public art. It's representing the values of the community. It's representing like what's happening, the current moment. It's something that's almost inexplicable in many ways. Like you kind of look at it and it's something that speaks to you. Or you walk into a space and you understand what's happening in that space. You understand a little bit about it. I think that that is just absolutely one of the things that I value the most about public art, and one of the functions of public art that I think should never die. Should never die. So I just wanted to say that, and yeah.
Cool. Meredith, I saw you jumping in there too.
Yes, I want to, reiterate what my previous colleague said, that it's about nourishment and comfort and lifting your spirits. And I would also add, dignifying and playful and sometimes kind of inscrutable to outsiders as well. And so inspiring a moment where you say, what is this? How does it relate to the context that I'm in, that it's new to me? And what does it mean about the community that I've joined, even if momentarily?
Yeah, that's great. You have sort of touched on this, but a lot of art forms, the production process is highly collaborative. Public art is extremely collaborative. We've talked about bringing people to the table. I'm wondering if your experience with the collaboration process for public art has made you more resilient or maybe less resilient because of adjustments we've had to make during the pandemic, and how your processes have had to adjust. Cherrah, I know we've talked a little bit about this, so I'm wondering if you could get us started.
Yeah, so I definitely think that in these times we've just had to be more resilient. So resiliency is something that's definitely been exercised right now. It's being exercised constantly. I think right now I work with Arts on the Block, and it is a highly collaborative space, and we're on Zoom right now. We're used to working physically with materials, working, in communities, going to people, having conversations with clients, etc. And it just looks completely different now. Everything is much more distance, which I think definitely brings up a lot of challenges, but it also makes it even more important to stress those values and to kind of remember the roots of what public arts is and never forget that, if that makes sense. So we talk a lot about community building and creating a sense of belonging with the works that we're creating, and how can we engage with community still, even at a distance? How can we be involved and understand that like this isn't something that we're doing in like a silo with just Arts on the Block? It's something that's representative of the people who are asking us to create these things. It's representative. It always needs to be that. So I definitely think it's made us more resilient. We've had to navigate Zoom in a different way, Google Meet, GoToMeeting, and trying to figure out how to be connected while doing that, how to stay connected, how to collaborate in designing while also being at a distance. I think it's allowed us as designers, as artists, to be more resilient and more confident in what we are producing, and what we are creating and what we can create. And it's also made us be even more collaborative, because you have to have those checks. You can't just do it and that's that. You have to be checking in with people. There's a give and take. And so, yeah, it's really difficult to say that I'm grateful for this moment just because of the pain that it's brought up and so many other things. But there are definitely ways that exercising resilience has brought up some incredible points and incredible questions.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of that too in my own work. And Ryan, thanks for using all the cool Zoom features. Why don't you jump on in?
Okay, I couldn't tell if you could see that. Yeah, I just want to echo what Cherrah's saying, that I think, it's really, we've been seeing people come together in new ways. And I wanted to just speak for a moment from the administrator perspective of, I love making art in my own community, but I work for the Maryland State Arts Council, and we commission works for state buildings, but we also give away community grants. And so we've really tried to, knowing that things are difficult to connect in the traditional ways, it's also created kind of an opportunity to give us an excuse to break some existing models out and maybe try to be more responsive and more listening to the practitioners, and think like, what can we open up right now and use this opportunity of challenge, this time of challenge, as an opportunity to change our model. And so things like rewriting grant application guidelines to allow like artists to apply directly without a organization as an overhead, which is exactly what I kind of heard Meredith describing about the power of that long project, is that it didn't seem like there was a real barrier to entry there. Artists could initiate things, or community members. And also, you know, like removing things like a match, like a financial match, because just money is tight and it's not going out the same way. We've been excited to be able to do that, those two things, but the need has just shown that it's, as we remove some of those barriers and more people are allowed to apply and ask for funds, it's also shown us how much larger the need and request is. So it's been an exciting time to change, but also overwhelming to see how much more we could be doing.
Yeah, totally. Meredith?
Just to add on to everyone's great ideas, I found that we've really needed to, I don't know how to unraise my hand. Oh, there it is. Resource sharing with other organizations. So really amplifying events that other organizations are doing, mostly because, you know, Brooklyn Public Library, knock wood, is pretty well funded right now. And some smaller organizations around us are really struggling, losing staff. So seeing, you know, where we can step in and use some of our staff time or expertise, or just pushing our audience to other folks' events, has been kind of a note of resiliency. And speaking to something that Ryan said, I'm so glad that you found ways to pay artists directly, because that's one of the things that I'm really nervous about, is just the resilience of the artists that we rely on, and how to pay them and keep them working in their fields.
I would like to add too, because I saw a question pop up about whether or not social media is a part of the platform. And I just want to remind folks, like what Meredith is saying is like, we strive to plan for the least of us, the least of people who may not have access to social media. And believe it or not, social media is a privilege that some of us do not enjoy. And so we want to make it so easy that you just walk up to it. So it's not exclusive. It's not, you don't need a ticket. You don't have to pay for the actual art. You want to pay for the artist, of course, because it's a contribution that they're making. It's their time, which is their money. And so I just also wanted to say that in this period of time, we've learned that some of these things that we've taken for granted a little bit, maybe some of us think, you know, we all are enjoying these privileges, that it has forced us to, you know, really stretch ourselves in other ways to be able to access people who do not have complete, full internet services and complete, full, and you know, a social media account is a privilege. So we want to make sure that it's accessible to every.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Molly, for calling out Jenna Best's question. We have some really good questions coming in. This is exciting. Cherrah, do you want to add?
Yeah, I really want to reiterate Molly's point. It definitely is, it absolutely is a privilege to have access to these specific resources. And I also feel like if you're put in that position, or if that is your position and you have access to them, I feel like information sharing is 100% the way to be able to connect people. It really is connecting people, collaborating through sharing your resources, whatever those resources are. I've been like incredibly excited about mutual aid and the way that mutual aid has showed up in this pandemic and even past that, and it's really getting its shine right now, as it should. And so I definitely think that, you know, it's kind of awkward to think about social media and sharing things as mutual aid. It's definitely not. There's so many other ways, or there are many other ways. But I definitely think that just sharing resources and collaborating in that way is 100% another way to get people involved, get people forward facing in some way, shape, or form. So
thank you. Thank you. My next question is getting into the weeds a little bit. I think it's safe to do that because this is a whole big group of arts managers. So I want to talk a little bit about the funding process for public art. I am curious, in your guys' individual roles, how does the funding process work, and does it affect the content that's being produced, and also does it affect the arts connection perhaps to the public that is being served? Ryan, what do you think, if you want to get started on this one?
Yeah, sure. I will follow up in the chat. I just want to plus one Cherrah on the connection between community art and mutual aids, like so strong. And shout out to Better Waverly and Baltimore, my neighborhood, for taking that charge. So I'll put that in the chat. But yeah, funding and public art, you know, I was touched on that a little bit with the grants, you know, trying to be as accessible and lower the barriers for that has been a big goal. The other thing is trying to push the boundaries of like what is fundable. So, you know, everybody's very familiar with, you know, your big sculpture, and like those are great, and I can really geek out about enjoying those. And I even debated putting one of those as my favorite piece. But you know, there are just so many wonderful artists working that don't even think that they can approach those kind of projects. So when we get our list of big capital projects, the way my job works for commissioning percent for artwork is we get a list from the state that says like, we're going to build these buildings over the next 5 years, and each one has a budget that you know what we can spend on art for that building. And we have, my team at MSAC has really been trying to think creatively about how to break that open and not just fund only big sculptures or things that only appeal to one type of art form. Trying to find ways to commission literary artists, audio work, get things that are outside of the realm of what is expected for like a lot of reasons, not just to be bigger than that, but to be accessible and to make work that artists from different backgrounds maybe feel more comfortable in and in creating, and also that more of the public can experience in a diverse number of ways. I don't know if that got off topic, but you know, I want to give room for my other colleagues here to respond to.
I'll just jump in. That totally relates to a question that we had come in about work that might challenge your perceptions of what is public art. It's great that you guys are funding work that isn't, we've talked about like public art with a capital P. There's so many different types of art that fit into this concept. Does anyone else have anything they want to add here?
I just wanted to also kind of chime in about the question of permanent public art and how we kind of create this ecosystem, a healthy ecosystem, and that's the way I think of it. I think that, you know, my background is in landscape architecture, and there is a place for everyone at the table. And I'd like to continue to think that way, that people who are artists like Judy Sutton Moore, who provide like permanent pieces of public art that make statements, those pieces of permanent public art are the values that never change. Those are the things that you always will come back to. And I think that the permanency should be applicable to the value that is placed in the community. And so if everyone believes that, then yes, it should be permanently there. And if it's not something that is not a core belief or is true to the core for the community, then maybe it's a temporary thing that you have a conversation about. And so I do think there's another question in the chat about permanency versus temporary public art. And so you should perceive it as this, that all of us have room at this table. This is not a limited capacity table. Like, this is big enough to fit everyone's values and everyone's core beliefs, but we have to kind of figure out what we do have in common, make those things permanent. And those things that we are unsure of, we can have temporary conversations or temporary exhibits that kind of showcase what we're thinking about doing in the future and see how people like it. If people like it, they'll tell you they like it. If they don't like it, they'll tell you they don't like it. So it's just a conversation that we're trying to have around public art. It's a tool. So you use it like everything else we do. Urban design, streetscape design, people in this area of the DMV for which I am born. I am native to this area. We are vocal about what we like and what we don't like. And I think that's a good thing, because at least we're having a conversation.
That I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because that hit on a point that I'm super curious about is how is the field adapting? Like, have things happen in the past year or recently that you think is affecting the future of the public art field? Or is there something that should be happening that isn't? Like, how do you guys see the future of this field and where it's going?
I'll jump in. I'm sorry. I'm very vocal today. And I also have dogs, which is why I'm moving around. So I apologize, but they're like babies. They need to go out and I'm not trying to clean up after them. So what I'll say is I love the fact that public art, and I've spoken to Ryan about this because we just did a review for the first piece of public art at an HBCU, Compton State. Big shout out to Compton State. But exciting things in the works for them. But I think that, like, I'm so excited that they're taking a community approach to providing public art, where there was this one, which shall remain nameless until it's announced. There was this one group who pulled it all together, that had a landscape architect on the team, that had an artist on the team, and they were thinking about the placement and thoughtfully thinking about the placement of public art, and having a landscape architect specifically think about how this piece integrates with the rest of the design. I'm really excited to have multiple perspectives, because then you can respond to questions that you get from not only the developer, which in my case, you get quite a few questions from the developer asking about how this works. Is this going to stop me from doing the rest of the project? I need to keep moving. I need to keep this schedule going. So you have all of the skills that you need when you're acting as a group, because you have multiple professionals. You have more than one brain doing the thinking.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't know what it is. It's almost like a question for everybody here. Sorry. But Molly, I love that point about, it can be a permanent art piece if it reflects the core values of the community. And I'm wondering about, for myself and just all of us, what the place of, like, the aspirations of what a community wants to be and how that reflects in public art. And I'm thinking about both aspirations of who we are in our communities and also aspirations for economic development, kind of placemaking and making, neighborhoods destinations. And I wonder what happens with, in Brooklyn, all these high rises that was kind of incorporating public art spaces to draw prospective tenants there. And if nobody moves there, what happens? Like, we just Brooklyn unveiled a Ruth Bader Ginsburg statue. Terrific. It's tucked inside a shopping center. Like, what's going on, I guess. If that's you, I hope that's useful.
Oh man, Meredith. That's such a good question. But the ties between what you just mentioned, the aspirational defining ourselves, either who we are, who we want to become or be, and creating landmarks and totems to that, versus the economic development, developer driven, who do I want you to think we are or belongs here, are maybe not always two opposite ends of the spectrum, but often two opposite ends of the spectrum. And we as administrators sometimes are pulled in between, and artists are often pulled, yanked back and forth. So I think on one hand, if we're just talking to the students and the people at this conference, is like, always be aware of that. And maybe in my younger self would have tried to be very rebellious against one or chastise it, but now it's just always like, really kind of, let's be really clear on where we are here and not try to pretend that it's not something, And so if a developer wants to commission a piece, I think I will engage on that. Of course, it's an opportunity for an artist and it's still developing a project, but, let's make sure the artist, I think, really kind of knows where they're coming in on that. And, then the other question is, when a community is making really aspirational work, there's still a very limited voice that maybe gets to decide that, who got to pick the artist. It can always become iffy, but those are exciting aspects too, because these things are intended to be somewhat permanent. That's a whole nother field going on in the chat right now, is people asking about permanence and reactions. That I don't know if we can get all the way into that, but I appreciate you bringing that up.
Cherrah, I saw your hand was raised.
Yeah, I think Ryan really touched on it, the point that I was going to make, and I always come in with a lot of skepticism around like aspirational creations, and that way, like, who is making these, like, who are the people who are often resourced to do that, and is there consideration in the community of that, and I think that those aspirational pieces, as well as like development pieces, are kind of, in my eyes, most of the time they're quite close together. And I know that there's definitely examples of them being on many different sides of the spectrum, but I often have like a lot of skepticism around like who, wealth, like race, class, etc., like who is actually behind this, and is it reflecting of the community? And so I'm often concerned with that. And yeah, I think that, yeah, I'm often concerned with that, often skeptical.
Yeah, no, this is super interesting. And we're getting like a flood of questions in on this topic. So I know other people are curious about it too.
Can I say something about the social media and the permanent stuff?
Yeah, please.
I am thinking about this a lot right now, of like the role of social media and documenting what's going on, because I feel like we're documented all the time, and I can go, in my own waves of being super into it and active, and sometimes it helps motivate me to get in the studio, and other times I'm like so overwhelmed I don't know where to turn. The ability to see, and we're experiencing this in these kind of meetings, right, that with people in London and people in Virginia and people in Maryland, the ability that we can all connect quickly is amazing. And the same goes for being able to scroll through Instagram and see posts about, physical reactions to sculptures by defacing them, interventions, removals, and creations of new things. So that's so cool that I can travel to Richmond and see what they're doing there, and then travel to Vancouver and see what they're doing there. I really worry, like, well, I think that allows a more acceptance of more temporary works, because they become accessible to such a bigger audience. I also worry about who's documenting that, and I feel like so much art is happening so fast that I am so concerned, like, who's going to catalog it, and a few times I've come across, boxes of old slides of art that happened in Baltimore, and I try to save it and think, oh, when I get the time, I'll sit down and catalog this. There's no way I can catalog it, or that it should be the responsibility of one person as a curator. I'm sure it'll work out. It's just overwhelming to my brain because I haven't lived through it before. It's a big question of, how does the temporary become a part of our collective memory?
And I want to jump in here too, because Ryan knows that we've been talking about this temporary thing on the Maryland State Arts Council because of the Black Lives Matter movement and trying to document all of the memorials that are going up. And he knows full well that in Baltimore, there's been he introduced me to the art of memorials and how memorials really should be true to your core, like celebrating someone's life as a result of a tragedy. Always, it touches my heart. But this ability to kind of document it by virtue of social media, I do think is a great way to make history in the present day and to remember the history that's being made in the present day. And we've had conversations about this as a council about, how do we remember this time of COVID-19? How do we kind of remember all of the conversations that we've had? And we do need to remember these conversations because history, again, nothing's new. It only repeats itself.
Yeah. Yeah, this is amazing. I'm taking notes too. This is really interesting. We have gotten in a lot of questions, and I'm hoping to shift to some of the questions that people are submitting. I noticed one from Danielle that I thought was interesting. She's curious how cultural institutions, I know we have people here from museums, from theaters, from galleries, like all over the place. How can cultural institutions use public art to move beyond their four walls? I know you guys work in the public art field. Meredith, you're like a slight exception here. Do you have, could you put yourself in other people's shoes and think about how they could move outside of their four walls and use art to do that?
I know that in the age of COVID, it's really difficult to say move outside of your four walls, but I really believe get out there, get out, get out of your four walls. Get invested in your community, understanding what's actually happening, get your ear to the ground, having those conversations where those resources are possible. Absolutely. I think that is 100% how to push things forward. I mean, Molline talked about doing an art walk. Are there, commissioned artists or commissioned pieces that are already up or ways that you can involve people from the community that have already created things and then give them a platform and give them praise and give them, give them their flowers. So I think that's definitely my first initial reaction to that question, which I think is a really important one. Really important question.
And I would just add to that, thinking about where you go in your community, if you have a main cultural strip, like we kind of do in Brooklyn with, there's a museum here, there's a garden here, there's a library here. Who does it serve for you to go immediately outside of your footprint? Are you trying to connect people back to your institution when you open again? Or is this an opportunity to go where there are people who are not as served often by cultural institutions and really move your site elsewhere?
I think if I can jump back in again, I also think that it's really interesting, the idea of galleries taking pieces from communities and then putting them into a gallery where it can be accessible to a certain demographic of people. And so also really thinking about that and challenging that, if that makes sense. I guess this isn't about taking art, but it's kind of going to art and and expanding that accessibility in that way, which I think is definitely your question. But I think that's I think that's I'm just excited. I'm excited, I'm jazzed.
Does anyone want to add any late-breaking thoughts on this one? Another, I don't know, an anonymous attendee, I don't know who submitted this question, but I thought it was interesting. It's again, getting back in the weeds a little bit. They're asking about the specific process of understanding what art a community wants. This is really kind of leaning on your guys' expertise and work processes, how do you identify the piece that's going to go somewhere, and how do you know that that is something that is serving the community?
I can start that. Where I go into thinking about that is that there's never going to be one answer And if we think that there is, we're starting in the wrong place, right? So it's like acknowledge that you're not going to just find the one thing that represents everybody, because that's silly. We want a place that not everybody agrees on stuff in a way. But, you know, really from the kind of administrator artist point of view, like creating a really fun process, or like a very just like thorough process you can be proud of and very open about. Like that process, it's not that it has to work for everybody, but you have to be very honest about it and very transparent and stick to it so that you're sticking to what you say you're going to do. So like that builds trust. You don't have to agree with me, but you got to know what I'm bringing and what you're going to expect, and I'm going to do what I said. And you know, there are all sorts of really interesting ways that you can go about selecting an artist, and you can draw them out like a big game board of who gets what votes and how do you get feedback. And you know, having a really great series of mentors to like learn how they do things is really important. And everywhere you go, there's going to be somebody who brings their own talents to that. But the biggest key is sticking to what you say you're going to do. So if you say you're going to have 7 people that represent the community you're working in, and they come from these backgrounds, or maybe they represent a college campus, you know, list it out in the front. Like, we're going to have 1 professor, 1 student, 1 administrator. They're going to review everything. They're going to vote. You know, that might be one way to go about it. But if you're doing that, don't then at the last moment let the school president come in and say, oh, actually, I prefer Gerald's work, and Gerald's going to get it because that's my favorite. Like, you've got to stick to what you're going to say. So that's always kind of like just a grounding principle to for me. But there are all sorts of really cool methods to go about crowdsourcing and artist selection.
I think someone followed up with that. Like, how do you do that when you're dealing with a private developer, or, you know, someone with like a strong stakeholder position in the process that might be influencing the content?
I don't have to work with a lot of private developers. We might give grants to private groups, but again, I think it's going back to that. If the private developer is going to get the final say, put it out there in the front. You know, like, let people know that, and then let them know how they're going to get to voice input in that process, but honor that. You know, just, it's again, be really transparent. I think the murkier the process is, the more open it is to distrust. And once you start sowing that or letting that happen, then you're losing credibility. You know, it could be that the developer of that mall really wanted to be able to say they were the first person, and I'm don't know enough about this project, so I'm just riffing on Meredith's example, but you know, maybe the mall or a shopping center just was like, we're going to be the first place in Brooklyn to make a figurative sculpture of a, you know, Supreme Court justice, and it's going to be Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We're doing it. That's what we've decided. But like, let's be really clear about how that happened and put it out there in the front. It's not going to make everybody happy, but you know, at least you're letting them know what the plan was.
And I also just want to kind of, since I work with private development, I want to apologize to you guys. I just also know that this is a Saturday morning. Please work with me here. I'm a mom. I'm like trying to really make this work. I apologize. But anyway, so my work with private developers, I know that they respond well to competition, right? Like, if we bring the right developers in and they start doing public art a whole other way, then they're going to have to compete. They're going to have to step their game up and do it the right way. And so we're in the process of having conversations about the type of development that we want, the type of developers that are working with public art and understand the value to its core. Because what I've discovered in my coordination is that, you know, some of them get it, some of the developers get it, and some of them don't. It's the conversation about racism. Some people want to have a conversation about racism, and some people don't want to have a conversation about racism. And do we spend time worried about the folks who don't want to have a conversation about racism, or do we work with the people who do want to have a conversation about racism? And so I would prefer to work with the developers who have used public art in an effective way. And it doesn't have to be our way. It has to be something that they are used to doing and that they have no problems with getting the project done in a very thoughtful manner.
Thank you. A question just came in that I absolutely love and hadn't thought about. Susan is asking about how do you measure your work? Like, do you test the impact? As a student, we talk a lot about research and measurable impact, and I'm curious, how are you measuring impact? Do you do that? What does that look like?
I'm not sure if anyone wants, can I go first? Okay. I think we're in the process of developing a method of being able to measure just everything in general, right? Like we're data-driven folks, but I also want us to remind you that there is hard data and that there's soft data. And what I'm hoping that comes from the conversation about data and the integration of measurement of success is that there are so many ways to measure success. And given my background in landscape architecture, one of the ways that is true to the designer is if they use it, if you see lots of people outside, then you count those people and you take inventory of why they're there in the first place. Like you actually talk to them. So there's the difference between like doing something with GIS versus doing a whole inventory report. And then there's something called oral histories. And then there's something called just interviewing people and doing surveys. So there's multiple ways that we can measure success. And I would hope that from this conversation we can discuss the new direction of public art is that it's a multiple faceted, multiple approach to, like there's no clear answer at this point, which makes me excited because that means that there's innovation. Like we're on the brink of something different, something that we can all be proud of. And so we want to be mindful that one way to do data sourcing, there's no one way to do it. That there's many different ways that you can measure success over time.
I'd like to add that I rely mostly on, I guess, soft data, and because I'm not exactly sure how to capture the hard data, but attendance, of course, but also I'm finding that with projects that we are repeating them because other organizations see it and want to know more about it, and lots of times want to come on as partners. So it's kind of like you feel this energy towards self-replicating in other communities. So we are starting on working like toolkits for different projects so that other communities can grab them and do it for their populations. And also in some way, it's press. Like if you get, articles about your project and requests for interviews about your project, that's saying something. You're succeeding, as long as it's not bad press.
Don't they say bad press is good press? Depends.
That a little bit. I was gonna say, I feel like bad press and bad press, whatever that is, I really feel like it also could be really useful. Like understanding the success of something is also understanding the criticisms of it, the critiques of it, taking those into account, holding yourselves accountable for like the art that we produce and what we put out there, and also understanding and being aware and available to that. I think that I don't want to give too many passes, but at the same time, we're not going to 100% get it right. But at the same time, if it's a project for the community, it's a project that's based around that. That's kind of what it is. It's like a give and take, a push and pull, and like we're all kind of accountable for each other in a certain way. It shouldn't be something that we are like completely shying away from. Yeah, I think there's something useful in that as well.
Big support for the soft data notes that Molly brought up and Meredith were talking. I mean, everything you all have said is just great, Cherrah. I gotta say, so I started at Maryland State Arts Council like 3 or 4 weeks just before the kind of things really set in and we started working from home. And I've just been really fortunate to work under our director, Ken, has been really awesome about moving things online and being thoughtful about us as staff, but being very open to the public engaging with us on virtual platforms and treating that as a method to collect soft data. So like every time we think something and we wonder it aloud in a format like this, he will hold, he'll just be like, oh, well, why don't we have a creative conversation, which will be just an open-ended community conversation, and we'll throw out an idea like, should we offer more of XYZ, and let people talk it out. And then we use that methodology to collect information and inform our next decision. And it seems obvious, but it's been pretty radical to see a state agency just collect new moves through like town hall meetings, basically. It's really inspiring.
Thank you. We have only 5 minutes left, but before we wrap up, I saw one comment in here talking about mutual aid specifically, which is kind of like this overarching thing that we've been talking around. I don't know if we've really defined it. Cherrah, do you want to just give us like 2 minutes? What is mutual aid and how does it fit into this conversation?
So I am still really trying to invest myself in understanding of mutual aid, but what I know of it so far is it's the resources, just sharing resources, and that is how we kind of circulate. It's through giving and taking, but also giving. I think that, can you ask just the first part of that question again? I completely blanked.
Yeah, no, I can you frame it in the context of public art? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like we've been talking about it here, but maybe not. Like, we've been talking around it rather than directly about it.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. Framing it in the way of public art. Well, I think that, I might need a little bit more time with that question.
That's okay. I'm sorry. I know that Ryan
Yeah,
just
no,
had
that's
an
fine.
amazing thought on the subject too.
Yeah.
I'll just say in this conversation, we have blurred the line a lot because we probably appreciate both of community art and public art. And I think community art is a lot about like meeting the community where they're at and trying to respond to their desires and their aspirations. And public art maybe is commissioning work that's going to represent the larger public on a much longer scale. And I think mutual aid has a lot in common with community art because it maybe is just about getting people what they're asking for right when they need it. And artists are remarkably well suited to provide that. We're imaginative, we're creative, we're resilient, we're used to working on a shoestring. And anything admin people can do to keep artists making and working that way, if it's giving out menstrual pads, giving out diapers, bringing food to the elderly neighbors, like they're ready to do it if you can help them.
Yeah, I also see mutual aid in that way as like providing services, if that makes sense. So as Ryan is talking about giving diapers, etc., like if you're a painter painting something, helping somebody beautify a space, if it's like a community center, if it's a daycare center, if it's a crib, if it's whatever, just being able to pass along what you have available, what's resource to you. But I also think of it in the way as access. Like some people just don't have access to being able to create. And so if you do have those resources, if it's knowledge, if it's passing along that, like holding courses online, if it's, having people in your neighborhood come together and just create chalk art, I don't know what it is. So I think that mutual aid can definitely look a lot of different ways. And thank you so much, Ryan, for helping me out. I think it can look a lot of different ways, and I think it can be successful in a lot of different ways. And so, yeah, I think definitely in terms of art in general, I absolutely think that mutual aid and they're kind of like this.
Well, we have 1 minute. Yeah, Meredith, please.
I was going to say, I'm sure everybody's noticed that it's been going on for a while, but more so now, artists engaging and presenting self-care practices that have an artistic element in their communities.
Yeah, no, that's great. We have a lot of conversations coming up over the next 2 days, and self-care is definitely one of them because it is so critical right now. I mean, it always has been, but it's incredibly important right now. Well, I think that's the end of our time here, which is wild. That went so quickly. Thank you guys for talking with us. And I want to just shout out everybody in the audience. We've had so many participants and I loved seeing comments come in, questions come in. It really felt participatory, even though we're all virtual. I have a lot of things to like take home with me and think about. I hope you guys do too. So yeah, thank you to our panelists. And I just want to remind everyone to keep an eye on Sched for all the stuff coming up this afternoon and tomorrow. And don't forget that there are a few tabs on Sched. Our resources page has a lot of cool information. We have a photo booth and we have an entire podcast series under the podcast tab. So with that, it is 1 o'clock and enjoy the rest of your afternoons.
Thank you all. Thank you
Bye.
for bringing us together, Sarah. I love meeting you all and being in discussion with you.
Thanks for chatting.
Ditto.